Welcome and thanks for coming to Buicks on the Bricks. I just want to do a short introduction on the behalf of Buicktown. I'm Dennis Manor and I'm part of Buicktown. And how many first-timers here? How many people are here that weren't here at 12 o'clock? A few? Okay. For those of you that are first-timers here, let me tell you just a little bit about this site. Across the street is a three-story building that Durant had his office in when he formed General Motors. About 10 years ago, this warehouse was where Durant built carriages before he built cars, and there's one on display back here, one of the originals. It was privately owned and in disrepair, and General Motors said, this is the birthplace of General Motors. We need to restore this building. Did a wonderful job on it. Took a couple years. And there's a university, college in Michigan, in Flint here, that's the old General Motors Institute that is now Kettering. And they had a library of Flint, Buick, and Chevrolet history, and they were out of room. And so GM built a state-of-the-art library up here and brought all that historical information down here. And there are conference rooms up there. And it's open for students and others to come and research Flint, Buick, and Chevrolet history. When they did that and started the restoration of this building, we Buicktown people are the Buicktown chapter of the Buick Club of America. And we're located out of Flint here. And they asked us Buicktown people if we would promote a show bringing Buicks to Water Street during the big Back to the Brick show that occurs over on Saginaw Street. And we said, yeah, we can do that. And so we've been doing that for about 8 years, except for a couple years during COVID. And one of the things that several of us have been involved in that worked at Buick, we've been working on trying to bring back presentations and displays that represent some of the history, and GM is capturing them by video. So long after we're gone, they're preserved. So we've had engineers come in and talk about the development of the Turbo V6 that ended up in the Grand National. We've done performance cars, Grand Sports. We've done history of V8 performance stuff and others. So that's what we're trying to do every year. So I just want to, for those that are first times here, that's what's here. It's free, and we'll try to continue to do that every year. I'm not sure what we're going to feature next year, but we're thinking about really early cars as probably a potential. So with that, those of us that are around, have yellow shirts on, if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. We'll try to help you while you're here. And I would like to introduce Mike Thodoroff, who's going to do a talk on his involvement with Special Reatta. So with that, I'll give you Mike.
Welcome, everybody. First of all, I want to let you know that I'm on staff here at Factory One, and we also have a couple other staff members here at Factory One. Matter of fact, this guy right behind all the tech stuff here, John Galloway is on our staff, and the guy in the back who's making all the controls here, Mike DeMarco, he's on staff. Kevin Kurbitz couldn't be here this afternoon. But I really want to say, on behalf of the staff of Factory One, welcome, and thank you for coming to these presentations here. But before I get going, I don't know if you listened to the first presentation from Dave McIntosh, but I got to tell you, you know, you look at all these Reattas out there, and I got to congratulate Dave on all the efforts that he put on that car. Look at that car today. It still fits in, doesn't it? It doesn't look like a car from the 80s, does it? That's a classic design, and that Reatta is really standing tall. I tell you what, my prediction is that's going to be like the Tri-5 Chevys. It's going to have its own following, but just a great design car. Okay, I also want to thank the Reatta Club for giving me the opportunity to talk about this car. And I'm going to tell you a little bit different stuff, because I'm going to tell you the inside stories. I'm going to tell you the backstories on how one of these one-off projects go, because it's fast and furious, I tell you. So let me get started by telling you, I can honestly say this car never would have happened if it wasn't for this car right here. Boom. Yeah. You know what that is? That's a 1986 Riviera. Not one of the best Rivieras in Buick history, that's for sure. And that's my own opinion. But let me set the stage for you and kind of tip you in the Wayback Machine on how it was back in the mid-'80s, because it had an effect on how we move forward here. Okay, first of all, in the mid-'80s, the industry as a whole was converting to front-wheel drive, right? With the exception of the Camaros, Firebirds, and Corvettes and such, all the pony cars. But that was quite a transformation, all right? That was one thing. The other thing was horsepower was just starting to come back from the emission restrictions back in the 70s. The engineers got smart, and they figured out how to make the engines more efficient, plus fuel injection replaced carburation, and that just opened up a whole new game. So the horsepower is starting to come back up. Now, in Buick's case, you all remember the classic Rivieras, right? That's just a classic design. Well, it became victim of the downsizing that the whole industry was going through. And in Buick's case, they had another image problem they were trying to shed. And that was the boat ride of the Buicks, you know, and all the wire wheel covers. Well, Buick wanted to shed that image, and that was kind of driven by the general manager at the time, Lloyd Royce, Lord rest his soul. But it was Lloyd that really pushed to change Buick's image. All right, so this was one of the results. He came with all the T-type options, which was a good approach aesthetically, and then it firmed up the suspension. But quite honestly, the public wasn't ready for this car right here, really. And by the way, do you know that this was the first production car that had a video screen? Remember that? 1986, the video screen. What do we have today? Every car has a video screen, right? Well, this car, yeah, he's holding this up, even in your hand. That car was the first one, albeit kind of crude. It had a video screen in it to do all the controls. Now, the car handled like a dream. It was really well balanced, but aesthetically, it just didn't sell it to the public. All right, now, back in those days, all the new cars were announced ahead of time at these press previews. These press previews were organized by the major press associations out there. And one of the bigger ones was out on the East Coast, a place called Lime Rock Park. But anyway, there were some like 3 or 4 major press shows. And what we would do is we'd take the Buicks out there, and what the organizers would do is they would line up the cars alphabetically, because every manufacturer showed up. So as you can imagine, it was pretty crowded and kind of confusing. So all the organizers lined up the cars alphabetically. So what does that do for poor old Buick? We're right next to BMW and Chevrolet. So if you're a press writer, what do you want to do? Go to a Buick LeSabre or a BMW M Series or the newest Camaro? Well, the old Buick guys were like the old Maytag guy. Buick just wasn't getting any response, even regardless of the T-types there. So we're back in Flint and we're talking about this. And the chief engineer, a guy by the name of Dave Sharp, we're at a staff meeting and he says, you know what? We got to come up with some incentive. We got to come up with a teaser car to get these press writers to come and at least look at our cars. And so the manager of the Buick's Vehicle Activities Department, a guy by the name of Larry Baker, greatest car guy I ever worked with. And by the way, This is a good trivia question. Larry Baker was the father of the Grand National. It was Larry Baker who come up with those proposals. This guy knew more about cars than anybody I've ever met. But anyway, he come up and he says, well, why don't we drop a Grand National engine into that Riviera? Boom. Everybody just lit up. Boom, that's got to be it. So Dave Sharp instructed Larry and myself to go out and put the program together, and he was going to get the financial approval and get the program going. So I'm going to shorten this up a little bit here, but it took us about 8 months to build the car, and we did put a Grand National engine in there, and I'll explain it to you a little bit here. But we were going to unveil this car out to Lime Rock Park in Connecticut, and it was in October. October was perfect because, you know, turbos love cool weather. So this was perfect. But during the time of the build, and by the way, the car was built at the old Buick Engineering Building. It's not there anymore, but if you remember that. But anyway, we wanted to keep the details kind of under wraps, but we had a East Coast public relations guy for Buick. He handled the whole East Coast, and I was feeding him details on the specifics of the car because it was his responsibility to come up with a press packet. All right, so we get that all set, and it's time to unveil the car at this show. And the PR guy's name was Marty Shore. He's not in business anymore, but in any event, I remember him specifically telling me, he says, Mike, when you get to Lime Rock Park, you get that car off the truck. He says, I want you to pull it up near the display area, kind of a safe distance, and I quote, let them know you're here. I says, okay. So this is how I let them know we were here. You know, the next time I show this, I'm going to put sound to this, you know. Look at that. I'm telling you that. Okay, I'm going to tell you a side story. This, believe it or not, this was only possible, believe it or not, because of the emergency brake. Yes, let me explain this. Now, this was the first year Buick and GM came out with these pump to set emergency brakes. Anybody remember those? You had to pump the damn thing 3 or 4 times before you set the brake, right? Well, yeah, that was a pain, but I'm telling you what, that emergency brake had more clamping force than any other brake out there. Matter of fact, I swear that brake would have kept a car from falling off a cliff. It had so much clamping force. So what I did was obviously pumped up thing, got that emergency brake set, then I put foot on the front brake, or on the brake, and then I started to build up the boost to about 15 pounds, and then just floored that sucker and slipped my foot off the brake. Boom, there's what you see right there. But, oh by the way, the engineer who released this brake is sitting right back there in the corner, Mike DeMarco. Thanks, Mike, for letting that happen. Yeah. Imagine that, an emergency brake giving you those results right there. Well, any event, obviously that was very successful, and it worked to a charm. We go to these, all these press previews, and this photo got out in all the major magazines, and these press writers were just flocking to the Buick fold to want to get in this car. But before you could get into this car, you had to drive the LeSabre, the Regal, the Park Avenue, all the other Buicks. The PR people were just, they were just ecstatic over that. That car had a really big following. And by the way, it was very successful on Woodward. I just thought that was appropriate for this time, right? But yeah, we did do some development work on Woodward. But anyway, to keep the momentum going, the Reatta, we campaigned this car for about a year and a half. Well, the Reatta was set to be introduced. And we're at another staff meeting, and Dave Sharp, chief engineer, once again, he says, you know what, guys? We got to keep this momentum going. Let's put that Grand National engine into the Reatta. So that's how the Buick Reatta, the Reatta came into be, because of the success we had with this car. Now, we set some different objectives. You know, this car was a race car, plain and simple, because of the timing, but damn was it fun. But we wanted to take the Reatta, because Reatta is such a classic car when it was coming out. Dave Sharp says, no, we want to refine this. We want to make this, this performance fit into what a Buick is all about. So make sure you take it to the next level. And so that's what we attempted to do. And by the way, you got to hear again, back at that time, there weren't too many, in fact, I don't know of any, high performance front wheel drive cars at the time. I'm talking 270 to 300 horse, right? Out of the front wheels. Matter of fact, I'd submit to you, is there any 300 horse front wheel drive cars out today? There isn't, is there? And part of the reason is because it's a whole new challenge, and I'm going to go through some of these challenges, what we discovered. So this Reatta Turbo really helped moving forward with high performance in front wheel drive. All right, so the whole purpose of the Reatta Turbo was built to evaluate front wheel drive high performance powertrains and the vehicle dynamics, the handling of the car. Of course, Larry Baker was the manager, and they had nobody else to assign it, so I said I'd take it. And then the whole thing, like the Riviera, was built at the old Buick engineering building by the guys there. And I'll go into some of the details now. Basically, it was, we took a Grand National engine, just the reciprocating parts, all the rotating parts, because we had to put it into a front wheel drive block, which had different mounting configurations. So all these that you see here were right out of a Grand National package. Now, keep in mind too, it was a 3.8 liter block, not to be confused with the 3800 block, which came out right around that time. Now, the difference between the 3.8 liter and the 3800 is the 3800 had a balance shaft, which really smoothed it out and helped the drivability, as opposed to the Grand National engine right there. Now, you see down here, we had speeds up to 144 mile. That was set at Milford Proving Grounds. We hit about 150 one time, because that's when we were up to 20 pounds boost, and we blew the head gaskets. We found out that was the greatest amount of boost that the V6 could handle, is right around 20 pounds, or then it would blow the head gaskets. I tried to get Dave Sharp to let us put in a stage 2 head, because Buick was making a stage 2 head, which had 2 more head bolts right in the middle of the head, which would have eliminated that propensity to blow the head gasket. But Sharp was adamant. He says, no. He says, we want to keep this as production as possible. Well, Dave, are we going to put in production? No, I ain't saying that. We need to learn more about this program. So we continued on with it. There's a picture, kind of crude, but you can see the plumbing. Here's the plumbing of the turbo. My biggest concern, you see we had a heat shield, and this heat shield was down there, because that was right around the power steering pump. Power steering pumps don't like high heat. So that was one of our challenges that we worked on. Here's the turbo right here. Here's the inlet, and here's the into the intake manifold. But this turbo, and I'll talk about here, that was the precursor to the GNX turbo. Okay, the turbocharger, yeah, it was a Garrett, the high response user, and the unique part of it, this is one of the first liquid-cooled, oil-cooled turbocharger, which was the next step in turbocharging. And that, like I said, that eventually went into the GNX. We had the stock mass airflow system, the stock fuel injection system, but we did open up the exhaust to 2.5 inches. The stock was about 2 inches, but obviously that thing needed to breathe a lot more, so we put 2.5. The transmission. Also remember, Buick came out with that 440 T4 in the first front-wheel drive LeSabres, Park Avenues. The transmission had a lot of issues. But I consulted with Hydromatic, and lo and behold, I found out Hydromatic had a motorsports division. Kind of an oxymoron, but yeah, they had their own motorsport division, and they were working on beefing up that 440 T4. So we had that. And what it did was it had enlarged feed ports, and what that did is that made the shifting, boom, more positive, boom, more quicker as it went through the gears. You can see that's probably foreign, whoops, to a lot of people, but the final drive, it was pretty comfortable. You could cruise 70 mile an hour at just over $3,000, $3.5 grand, yeah, kind of high. But at least it was pretty drivable on the expressway. All right, then of course, we had to increase the front and rear spring rates, and we also used larger and stock front and rear sway bars. And then all of that vehicle dynamics stuff was performed by Buick's development group at the Milford Proving Grounds. And those guys did a lot of work for that with us. And see, the biggest challenge on that car, one of the challenges on the car, that whole platform was kind of front heavy. And so it made for great looks, but it presented some challenges for not only vehicle dynamics, but also for the braking. And I'll address that in a little minute here. All right, here's what we found. This was the biggest challenge for high performance, no matter what car it is, this is your challenges for high performance vehicle dynamics. It was the torque steer. And what that was is, damn, you take off and you press on accelerator, boy, that steering wheel just went up, crank left. And I'm going to explain how that happened. Well, part of the reason is, I think the biggest ones, I got it out of order, is the unequal length half shafts. I'm going to show you a picture of that, but that stands to reason. One's going to be a little bit more pushier than on the other side, so that was an issue. And I'm going to tell you what we did to try to alleviate that. But another thing was the way the half shaft came out of the transaxle. All right, ideally, you'd want, if this was the transaxle, the wheel bearing was typically down here. Well, that's a pretty steep angle. That just aggravated the condition, but ideally, you'd want it parallel to the ground. Obviously, that would be a whole new design, so, but that's what we found in the development phase. Now, trying to eliminate that torque steer, I went to Saginaw Steering Division, which is no longer in business here, but come to find out, they were already working on solutions to the torque steer per the corporation directive. And what they found out, which we had installed on the Reatta, was that they come up with this electronic variable orifice system that used a metering rod that moved in and out of an orifice to control fluid flow from the power steering pump. Now, the power assist was varied with the vehicle speed. So in other words, the faster you went, the less assist that you have, which would stiffen up the steering. We also had a sensor at the throttle position sensor that when it sensed the wide open throttle condition, it would eliminate any type of assist, which would really stiffen up the steering wheel. In theory, yeah, it did work, but it was not refined. It just did not have a good feel of it because, boom, it was jerky. You'd start off and it was just, you still felt that torque steer in there. So that was a nice approach to it, and I'm sure we could have did more development work on it, but we just never had the opportunity. And the other thing is that Saginaw Steering had this theory. They installed conical shaped drive shafts, the half shaft, to help compensate for the torque steer. Now by that I mean is this right here. There's the half shafts. You can see the different lengths here. But in effect, what they would do, and this is exaggerated, the drive shafts would be conical shape. And what that meant in real world is this would rotate because it's a bigger diameter, but this end would rotate slower because of the difference in diameter than that end. Therefore, in theory, it was supposed to kind of eliminate the torque steer. Well, the first iteration we had, this angle was only about 5 degrees, and that just wasn't enough, and we just didn't have enough time to, let me see if I got that. Yeah, we just didn't have enough time to further development on that. So, and quite honestly, that wasn't going to be the solution to torque steer. All right, so moving on, we had the tires. Yeah, the tires were bigger, and I put this up to compare the stock size. They were 15 inches compared to the 16 inches. Well, obviously we needed that. Which was really cool though. We worked with an aftermarket wheel company called Modern Wheel, and they developed in conjunction with our development they had a two-piece construction with a unique directional design that funneled air inside to the brakes. It also had a 10-pound weight reduction, and this is what I mean here. You see this right here? These are directional. In other words, you couldn't put these on the other side. They have to stay on here because these would actually scallop the air. It would suck the air onto the calipers there, and it really worked good for cooling off brake. Because like I said, this car was very front heavy, and one of our main concerns is when you're pushing this thing is how the front brakes were going to hold up. So this was very effective. As a matter of fact, Modern Wheel went on and they put that in their own production, and it was an aftermarket piece for years. So it was a very successful program on that. Now, the other thing we did, oh yeah, remember I said it was the first car to have a video display? Well, what we added to that, God, I should have had a picture of it, but what we had added to that is the boost. We added a boost gauge on the CRT screen so you could see what boost you have. And while I'm on the boost, what we did is we knew we had to find out where the car would be at different boost rates. It would be as low as 8 pounds, and like I said, we got it up to 20 pounds. But we also did that. We had a little bleeder valve that was buried in the console. We didn't tell anybody about it, especially those damn press writers. And then when we went to a press show, we had it dialed down to about 10, 12 pounds. That was enough for that, but it had a lot more capability. But that was another unique feature that we had for development. We could adjust the bleed off of the wastegate to regulate the amount of boost that was coming. Very, very useful. And also we had the front fascia. We had, it was fiberglass, and it was built at the Buick Engineering Building. 2 of the openings went right to the brakes. So we not only had those directional wheels drawing air to the brakes, we also had these ducts right here, which is where the fog lamps were, ducted once again at a different angle. So actually, it was very effective because it was kind of a turbulent air, and it got the hot air out of there while drawing in cool air. Very effective. And we also modified the intake. Let me go back here. We also modified the intake so that it would direct more air to the radiator for obvious reasons. So then we get to the performance of the thing. And this was our final our final numbers. The car was kind of heavy, it still is, but 3,800 pounds. But at 8 pounds of boost, we were cranking out 7.6 0-60s, which is pretty quick. At 16 pounds of boost, which is probably the highest you want to go and still maintain reliability and durability, and that's impressive. 5.7 at 0 to 60, that competes with today's high-performance rear drive cars. And we would get just under 100. But like I said, there were a couple times we cranked her up to 18 pounds of boost, and we were getting about 5 seconds, and we were hitting 100 out of there. So the car definitely had the capabilities. So anyway, we campaigned this car for about a year, and it was very successful. And we had it at a show in Arizona at a place called Firebird Raceway. It's still in existence today, but it's a great complex. It's got a road course, it's got a drag race course, plus it has a big pond that they use drag boats in. Really cool. But anyway, Buick had one of their shows out there, and it was kind of a by invite only, because we showed all our concept cars out there. The Reatta Turbo was one. We had, and I'll just touch on these, we had Buick Estate Wagon. Remember those? The estate wagons with the wood grain side? We stuffed the GNX motor in that thing, and we put a Reatta interior in it, and we had a lot of fun with that car. We also built a 3800 supercharged Regal, the old GM10 platform. And then we also built, this is another story for another time, we also built a rear drive Reatta, okay? And this car was, it was crude, but it was very interesting because the rear end, we used a Corvette fiberglass rear spring and a Corvette rear end. But the issue with that car was the steering. You know, the way the overhang was, it kind of presented a challenge. And we had to go to conventional steering. And what that did was, it dictated that we mount the engine 4 inches off center. And what that did was that we had to have a 2-piece drive shaft. All right, so as long as you went in a straight line, boy, that thing would push you back in the seat. But as soon as you turned, boy, that 2-piece drive shaft didn't cooperate. We just needed more development time. But it was good to show the group what we were looking at. And then we had the front-wheel drive Reatta Turbo that I'm talking about here. And this is where the car ended. And this is how the car ended. I could go on this one, let me tell you. Some press writer driving way over his head, and the road course out to Firebird Raceway is pretty unique in that, especially where he lost it here, you had a big sweeping turn, but it had a decreasing radius. So you know what that means? Oh, you go in there, oh, this is great. Well, then the radius tightens up, and then guess what happens? You know, you panic if you're not knowing what you're doing. And like I said, the car was a little front heavy, so the minute you stab on those brakes, guess what happens? The rear end slides on, and this guy, he didn't let off, and he T-boned the wall. And that's what it ended up at. But, you know, yeah, we were upset. Boy, I was in my 30s. You don't think I got upset? But anyway, and the other thing was that really made me mad was, do you remember back at this time, Buick was sponsoring engines for the support class of the IndyCar racing. It used to be called Indy Lights. Well, Buick was the big engine sponsor. They all ran 6 cylinders in that support series. You know, it was the up-and-coming series, just like the Xfinity series is for NASCAR. And they were out here looking at this car because they wanted to use this car as the pace car for the entire series. And if they were going to use the pace car, guess who was going to have to go with the car? Yeah, I was a little upset. But anyway, you know, after the dust settled, you know, you kind of gather your thoughts. Number one, and most importantly, the guy walked away. You know, that's the bottom line. We figured that was about a 50-mile-an-hour hit. And I want to tell you this, that all you guys driving Reattas, there's a case. You are driving one safe automobile, a very safe automobile because of these factors right here. You see this right here? That hood is designed to do that on a crash. It's designed to buckle on an impact, built on the inner panel. Built on the inner panel is what we call crush beads, and it's a weakening point so that under an impact, that thing will crush where it was supposed to. The other thing is, look at this. The hood's still attached. You ever seen a 50-mile-an-hour hit? Damn, that's scary. But that hood stayed right where it was instead of going through the windshield. And that's designed that way because there's a hinge catcher system, and there it was. It proved that it worked. The other thing you can't see is the engine actually rocked down, which is what you want it to do in a wreck. You don't want that thing come flying through the hood, but it is designed to rock down because of these crush beads that were built into the engine cradle in the mounts. So what you see here is proof that all you guys driving Reattas, man, you're in one safe car. 35 years later, this car is proven to be safe. And you know what? After all said and done, we like to end on this image right here, because that was a great project. It proved a lot. It's unfortunate that we couldn't continue it, but they had already announced that the Reatta wasn't going to continue in production. So we took all our learnings, fed it to the corporation, and like I said, you don't see too many 300 horsepower front-wheel drive cars today. Well, because of the challenges that we exposed to them. So it was a very worthwhile project on that. So I'm going to end with that, end in that great image. And I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time to listen. This was the first time this story's been told, by the way. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that story. But we're going to leave with that. And I will also offer, we're going to stick around, me and Mike will stick around. If you've got any questions about these displays, anything over at the archives, we'd be glad to give you a little crib on each one of these displays, or even this building we can talk about for you. But once again, thanks a lot for listening. Thanks. It's all you. It's all you.
This presentation, or is this in the archives?
No. This is the first time it's ever been shown. Yeah, I just put this together. Jenny asked me a couple months ago, and I said, yeah, I've never told that story before, so I'd love to share this with you.
So it's a first timer for you.
Yeah.
So it's part of our plan. So come back next year. We'll have another surprise for you.
Yeah.
What happened to the hull?
I'm sorry?
What happened to the hull after it was crashed? Was it just crushed?
It's just crushed.
Scrap. I'll tell you another little tidbit about the Reattas that many of you don't know. Do you remember we brought out a supercharged 3800 engine in 1992? Because I worked in engineering in my career and helped develop engines, including the 3800. We started the development of the supercharged engine in Reattas, and the intent was in 1992 to bring the supercharged 3800 out in the Reatta first. And they canceled the program for no 92s. We switched our engineering program and brought the engine out in the Park Avenue Ultra. But it would have been the first supercharged engine we would have had in Reatta. Question?
With the 3800 and all this development into the turbos and even like the superchargers, Chevrolet, when they came out with Camaros in the 90s, why didn't they take those and put this, like the Grand National motors or the supercharger motors? Because they work with the 3800s in the Camaros. Why didn't they do that?
Well, you know, the Firebird got that engine. The Firebird got, or I'm sorry, the Trans Am got that engine.
Right, that anniversary.
Yeah, for the anniversary. And it was a change though, because they had to change the angle of the heads to clear the shock towers. But other than that, I think this is the guy who can answer that.
Yeah, the Grand National Turbo 3.8, different engine than 3800, was in the Regal. And GM stopped making the Regal in 1998. So we didn't have a home to put the engine in. And Pontiac was interested in putting it in the Trans Am, the Turbo Trans Am. So we redesigned the engine. As Mike pointed out, the engine compartment is smaller. So we had to narrow the cylinder head, and we had to different exhaust manifold. Those engines had tubular exhaust manifolds that were really tight packaging configuration, so we could get it in the car. And so we put the turbo in, the turbo trans in, I think for both 98, 88, and 89. So we didn't have a home for it, but we could build it in Flint. Engines are built in Flint.
Do you think you'll ever resurrect the Grand National motor in modern cars?
The 3.8?
Yeah.
No. The 3800 is another story. The engine is completely different than a 3.8. It's the same displacement, but I could go on for an hour and tell you about all the changes that we made to do that engine, and of course the iterations that we went through it. In my career, I started it doing way back. I was there when we built the first D6 in 1962. And then the iterations we went into it, make a long story short, cars were getting heavier, we didn't have a market for the 6, we sold it to American Motors. They moved all the equipment down to Toledo. Willys ended up buying her, it was Willys, then American Motors bought them, and they didn't produce the engines. And then the fuel crunch hit. And I can tell you, we had durability testing of 525 cubic inch V8 to go into the Buick electric, and the fuel crunch hit. And we shut the program down in a hurry. 525, we made an electric run, let me tell you. I drove many of them. We went up and got 2 old V6 engines out of the junkyard short of Flint, brought them down in engineering, put them together, started figuring out how to do emissions. And Ed Cole called. And my boss took a Buick Apollo with the V6 in it, with the exhaust system hanging down underneath the car because it was cobbled in for the catalytic converter. And Ed Cole got in the car and went to Toledo with his accountant and 2 engineers out of Flint and started the negotiation. Make a long story short, American Motors did not want to build V6 engines. We said, we'll design and develop it. If you will produce them, you get half, we get half. They didn't want a deal. So General Motors bought all the equipment back at 3 times the price that we sold it for in January, and 118 semi-loads. All that equipment went back into our engine plant, 36 up north side of Flint. And in the summer, we were building 700 a day. And the equipment was old and used, and we converted the whole plant. And we also converted a module in Lansing, and we had the capability to put 6,000 engines a day. We built about 5,200. Once we had the 3,800 out, so that's the short story. So, told you more than you probably wanted to know. Other questions?
Did you ever consider doing anything with 4-wheel drive or all-wheel drive on any of the, whether it's the Riviera or the Reatta?
At this time, back in the mid-80s, no.
That's too early.
Yeah, it was. Remember, the industry had just transitioned to front-wheel drive, which presented a whole bunch of challenges. Fuel injection was replacing carburetors. The horsepower was starting to come up. There were just too many other, and SUV wasn't even thought of back then, you know, other than what Jeep had. But no, it just wasn't the time for it.
Do you have a comparison for what a stock Reatta was compared to the turbo that you were running?
I don't have any documents from them, but yeah, 0 to 60 on a stock Reatta was, it was probably 14 or 15 seconds, about 7 seconds. 7 seconds, 0 to 60. It was pretty quick, actually.
So you basically were cut it in half.
Yep. Yeah, and believe it or not, that little 3.8 liter, for a 6-cylinder, it has some pretty useful torque. And that's what gives you the feel of pushing back in your seat. Damn, that was fun. Damn. So, good question, though. Matter of fact, I'm going to revise the slide too. That'd be a good comparison. Thank you for that.
Oh, that the end? Thank you much for coming. We do Buicks on the bricks every third Saturday in August. We're going to plan something different for next year. So if you're interested, come on back. We'll have a program.